So, as we mentioned in the last couple of episodes, we're doing something special for the month of December, and we're spending these last few episodes of the year recapping what's been happening in the true crime world in 2024. In the last episode, we talked about cases like Sean Kingston's house getting raided and the Brian Koberger trial. So, if you want to hear more about those, definitely check out the last episode. Now, why are we doing this? We often get questions and requests from our listeners saying like, "Oh, cover this big case in the news," or "What do you think about this case?" And we typically don't cover those cases for a couple of reasons. One, we like to cover cases that are lesser known and haven't received as much attention. And two, we like to wait until the trials and everything have finished up so that we have all the facts and we don't have to say allegedly, because let's be honest, we get tired after all that. But at the same time, we are a podcast of the people and we know y'all want to hear our thoughts about all the crazy stuff that's happened this year. So we're going to finish out this recap series by talking about cases and stories that took place between September and December of 2024. Just a disclaimer though, we are recording this on December 15th. So all we ask is that y'all please behave because we won't be able to talk about any foolishness y'all do between now and the end of this month. But if y'all do something especially foolish, maybe we'll talk about it on a Patreon episode. Maybe. Can't promise anything. And with that, welcome back to your True Crime Wrap.
Hi, I'm Dev.
And I'm Cam.
And you're listening to Criminalish, a true crime podcast where two best friends trade stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up. So before we get into the wild, wacky, and downright messed up of 2024 as we close out, what you drinking, friend?
Well, I think the better question, Dev, is what are we drinking? Because we decided to celebrate the last episode of season 2. We would have ourselves some champagne. So I am drinking another wine from the Williams-Sonoma collection that my mother sent me, which is a M. Brugnon, probably not pronouncing that right, an M. Brugnon champagne from France. What are you drinking, friend?
Well, friend, I am drinking the La Marca Prosecco sparkling wine, really, because I love Prosecco. And as we all know, champagne is only champagne if it comes from Champagne, France. But I am partaking in some champagne adjacent beverages to celebrate our last episode. And we hope you guys are celebrating with us because also the new year is upon us.
Right. We are only a few days away from 2025. And while that may bring a lot of fear and anxiety for us and many of our listeners, there is also some excitement there. We've enjoyed so much the time that we've spent together and with y'all this year. And we look forward to bringing you all more cases and more stories beginning April of next year when we kick off season 3. So cheers to us and cheers to y'all. Clink, clink, clink.
So now to get into the cases of today's episode. And I'm going to kick us off with what crazy stuff y'all were up to in September of 2024. And our first case definitely belongs under wild, wacky, and messed up. Because on September 16th, 2024, Judge Jeffrey Fraser handed down Ali Abulabin 2 consecutive 25 to life sentences, ensuring that he will spend the rest of his life in prison for the murder of his estranged wife, Anna, and her friend, Rayburn Barron, at the Spire San Diego luxury apartments. In October 2021, Ali, a former San Diego TikToker known as Jen Kid, murdered his estranged wife, Anna, and her friend, Rayburn, and admitted to the killings during his trial. The jury ultimately found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and special circumstance allegations of committing multiple murders. On May 29th, 2024, After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury rejected his defense's claim that the murders were second-degree murder due to a heat of passion or a, quote, drug-induced psychosis, end quote. They concluded that the crimes were premeditated and deliberate. Ali had spied on Anna and used a key card he was not authorized to have to enter her apartment. Armed with a gun, he killed Anna and Rayburn as they sat on the couch. The jury was also shown graphic evidence of the crime, including photos Ali had taken of the victims and his internet searches about how to dispose of a body. Prosecutor Taryn Brast argued that the murders were driven by possessiveness and control, citing a history of domestic abuse and Anna's expressed fear of Ali. The prosecution detailed how Ali had multiple chances to rethink his actions, but instead planned the killings and even reloaded his weapon between shots. Ali's defense attorney, Jody Green, argued Ali's actions were not premeditated and pointed to Ali's traumatic childhood, mental health struggles, and cocaine use at the time of the crime. He stated to the jurors, quote, Ali Abulabin is not a murderer. Yes, he killed Anna, the woman he loved, the mother of his beautiful daughter. I'm not going to say the child's name. And he killed Ray, a man with whom Anna was having an affair. And he cannot undo what he has done. But he did not murder them. He is not a murderer, end quote. During the sentencing, emotional victim impact statements were delivered by Anna's family members. Anna's sister condemned Ali for the abuse Anna endured and lamented about not being able to rescue her and her daughter. Rayburn's family described him as a caring and selfless person whose death had left them completely broken. And Ali actually screamed at the victims and the prosecutor during their impact statements and while the prosecutor made arguments to the court. In the end, Judge Jeffrey Fraser handed down Ali 2 consecutive 25 to life sentences, ensuring he will spend the rest of his life in prison. The judge rejected Ali's claims of remorse, calling him, quote, a very talented actor, end quote, who was more concerned about himself than his victims. Quote, he's a very selfish person, as I think the jury saw. The bottom line here is he will die in prison. He will never be a free man. He will take his last breath there, end quote. Family members of Anna and Rayburn expressed relief that justice was served, even as they acknowledged that nothing could undo this completely unnecessary tragedy.
This is why they say that the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence is when they have left the perpetrator of that violence. Because she had gotten out, she'd attempted to move on. It's really a stretch to call what she did cheating or having an affair, considering the fact that for all intents and purposes, they were not together.
Exactly. That's the most audacious part of the defense's argument to me. Because again, it goes back to that villainizing of the victim. Oh, she was having an affair. They weren't together. They were legally married, but they were not actively together. And whether it was even a affair is still up in the air for me personally. But you're absolutely right. This is why people say it's so dangerous when they leave. Because I'm sorry, if your significant other is living in a completely different apartment than you and you're not supposed to have access to their house, y'all are not together. You do not get to call her your wife. You do not get to say that she's having an affair. No, she has moved on. She is leaving you. And Ali is very much the epitome of a made man. But honestly, I think anybody who feels like they need to put their hands on their significant other in order to assert dominance in that relationship is made. But he's so much of a that even when justice is finally coming down on you, you really have the audacity to yell at the prosecutor, to have outbursts, to yell at the victims' families. Really? And one more sprinkle here, because I got a lot of smoke for this defense attorney. Yes, he killed 2 people, but he's not a murderer. Even if he got second-degree murder, that still puts him in the category of a murderer, sir.
Yes, I stole from you, but I'm not a robber.
I ain't no thief. I just took that from you. You weren't really using it.
Yeah, and we've said it before. We understand that defense attorneys have to give a defense, but to debase yourself like this, really?
Exactly, because I've seen plenty of great defense attorneys who make arguments that make sense, that don't degrade the victim, that doesn't villainize the victim, and actually makes you buy into what they're saying because they focus on poking holes in the evidence instead of degrading the character of the person who can no longer speak for themselves. And that, to me, is the difference between a great defense attorney and a regular defense attorney. Because whether you like it or not, the best defense attorneys who get people out of their crimes poke holes at the evidence, not at the victims.
Well said.
Thank you. Thank you, friend. So for our next case in September, we will be discussing a teen who killed his father in 2023 and is now being charged with his mother's murder. So on September 13th, 2024, a 17-year-old from Florida was charged with first-degree murder for the fatal stabbing of his mother, Catherine Griffith, in a mobile home in Auburndale, Florida, less than 2 years after being arrested in Oklahoma for fatally shooting his father. The Oklahoma charges were dropped at the time as authorities could not disprove his claims of self-defense. In February 2023, the teen was arrested in Oklahoma after shooting his father in the head and chest. He claimed self-defense, stating his father had threatened him with a knife. Although charged with first-degree murder, the case was dismissed as investigators could not disprove his story. 18 months later, in September of 2024, deputies from the Polk County Sheriff's Office responded to a 911 call placed by the teen, who claimed his mother had, quote, fallen on a knife, end quote, after lunging at him during an argument. Catherine Griffith, who was 39 years old at the time, was found dead at the scene with a fatal neck wound caused by a 12-inch kitchen knife. The medical examiner later ruled the injury inconsistent with an accident. According to Grady Judd, quote, the medical examiner said it is not reasonable or plausible that she died the way that the teen said she did, end quote. Sheriff Grady Judd described the incident as, quote, cold-blooded murder, end quote, citing witness accounts of the teen dragging his mother by her hair into the house earlier that same day, as she reportedly pleaded, let me go, end quote. The teen had a history of violence and threats against his mother, as in September of 2023, he was hospitalized twice under Florida's Baker Act for expressing suicidal and homicidal intentions. He had said, quote, I'll kill myself or I'll kill my mother by shooting or stabbing her, end quote. Months later, he was arrested for domestic violence after attacking Catherine during an argument over video games. In February 2024, he fled his home in Charlotte County after another argument and went to his grandmother's house in Auburndale. The grandmother had expressed safety concerns about the teen, leading to his brief placement in the custody of the Department of Children and Families. Following the stabbing of his mother, the teen was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and other related crimes. Sheriff Grady Judd has urged prosecutors to try the teen as an adult. Meanwhile, Oklahoma authorities are monitoring the case and may reopen their investigation into the father's death if new evidence emerges.
It must be a terrible thing to be afraid of your child.
Absolutely. And I imagine that fear is also so complex because you love your child. You brought them into this world, you raised them up, you took care of them, yet they seemingly are the biggest cause of fear in your life.
And you don't want to give up on them, but there does come a time where you have to put your own safety first. And I don't think we know too much about his upbringing and what could have caused this. Is this nature versus nurture? But based on the fact that his mom stuck beside him, even after he was under investigation for his father's death, that does show me that she had a level of dedication and love for him. And it really does seem like he was going through some mental issues that made everyone around him fearful. And I feel so bad for the grandmother too, and his other family members, because we've said it before, when you have cases where a family member is responsible for the death of another family member, you lose two family members, you lose multiple family members in that case because one is no longer on this earth and the other is probably unrecognizable.
You're absolutely right. And I think one of the saddest things about that is, what do you do? If you're fearful of your child, if you seriously believe your child is a threat against your life, what do you do? Like you said, I feel so bad for this family because that's not an easy predicament to be in, Nobody's going to just throw their kid away because they're scared of them, especially if you love them, if you're dedicated to them, if you think they need you, if you think that you can do something. And yeah, cases like this are just so complex for every reason, for the loss of multiple family members, for the confusion, for the pain, for the internal conflict that comes with this, for the years of therapy that will be needed after this. And I feel so bad for everybody involved. And our final case for September will be one that I haven't been following, but I'm about to start, because on September 19th, 2024, in the small town of Whiteburg, Kentucky, with a population of just 1,711 people, a longtime sheriff, Sean Steins, who was 43 at the time, allegedly shot and killed District Judge Kevin Mullins, who was 54 at the time, in the judge's chambers following an argument. Sean, who turned himself in at the scene, now faces first-degree murder charges, but the motive for the crime remains unclear, leaving the community in disbelief and searching for answers. The small town was already grappling with controversy involving both men, as days earlier, on September 16th, Sheriff Sean Steins had been deposed in a federal investigation tied to his former deputy, Ben Fields, who had pled guilty to raping a female prisoner in the courthouse. Ben Fields was fired in 2022 and sentenced this year to 6 months in jail and 7 years probation. A lawsuit was filed by two women where they alleged that Sean Steins failed to appropriately investigate the claims against Ben Fields, though Sean's defense argued that he acted in good faith. Adding to the complexity, reports surfaced after Judge Kevin Mullins' death, linking the judge to a sex for favors scandal. Audio recordings from an investigation alleged Judge Kevin Mullins had run a brothel from his chambers, exchanging leniency for sexual acts. Witness Sabrina Atkins, who had filed a lawsuit against Ben Fields in 2022, claimed to have seen videos showing Judge Kevin Mullins and others engaged in these acts in the courthouse. Judge Kevin Mullins' alleged misconduct has left a dark shadow over the case. Before the shooting, Sean Steins and Judge Kevin Mullins had been friends and colleagues for over a decade. On the day of the incident, they reportedly had lunch together before the fatal argument. Residents described Sean as a beloved figure and were stunned by the accusations against him. Patty Wood, a friend of Sean, insisted that the sheriff's actions were out of character and speculated that something significant must have triggered the event. In the days following the shooting, Sean Steins resigned as sheriff to allow a successor to serve the community, according to his lawyer. However, Governor Andy Beshear had been preparing to remove him from office. Sean Steins pled not guilty to the murder charge, and the investigation into the events leading up to the shooting continues.
Yeah, girl, this is one of them cases where the Google alerts will be on, because based on what everyone's saying about him, based on what we know about the judge, this is some Shonda Rhimes level mess. And not to diminish at all what happened, but it is just messy. Also, let's talk about this judge and this other deputy using the court chambers, the chambers in a house of justice, to do such heinous things. This is like the prime example of why consent cannot be had when there is such a strong difference in power.
Absolutely. And this might be a popular opinion, but if you have to convince somebody to do an act with you, they have not consented.
Right.
Consent is enthusiastic and willingly given. That's what consent is. And absolutely, the Google notifications will be on with this, because not only do I smell mess, but I smell corruption. And that's what I'm interested in. I smell this whole thing reeks of corruption.
I'm just wondering who else is involved, because a brothel doesn't only have 2 clients.
Come on now. Come on now. If it's a brothel, he's got a rotating door.
Mm-hmm.
And that completes all of the crazy cases that took place in September. If I missed any cases, be sure to let me know in the comments down below.
And now we're getting into spooky season, and the things that y'all were doing in October were indeed spooky. We're going to kick October off with the death of Liam Payne. which took place on October 16th, 2024 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Liam Payne, a former member of the band One Direction, died after falling from his hotel balcony. Police claim that his fall was caused by him being under the influence of cocaine and allege that an Argentinian waiter named Brian Pais supplied him with the drugs. A toxicology report would show that he had alcohol, cocaine, and antidepressants in his system. On November 7th, police charged 3 people in connection with Liam Payne's death. While they have not been named publicly, we know that one is someone who was close to Liam and maybe worked for him, another is a hotel employee, and another is a person who supposedly supplied him with drugs. Potentially the same man I just named, Brian Pais. On December 10th, the judge in the case announced that they were considering charging 2 more hotel employees in the case. However, the judge has a 10-day period to interview the suspects and decide whether to charge them. Now, when it comes to this Brian Pais character, police are saying that Liam basically met him at a high-end restaurant and the 2 exchanged messages and met up over the next few days, during which they took drugs together and did other less innocuous activities like listening to Liam's unreleased music. Now, Brian Pais has spoken to a news outlet and confirmed that Liam messaged him about buying drugs, but he denied that he ever actually gave him drugs. Now, the interrogation of the people who were charged are set to take place on December 17th and 19th, just 2 and 4 days from when we are recording this episode.
This was another case that was similar to when the news of Matthew Perry's death came out that I was just immediately suspicious of. As soon as I heard of Liam's passing, I was like, everything about this case is stinky. Nothing is passing the smell test. Everything feels off. Something's not right. And this is definitely a case that I have my alerts on to keep an eye on, because I just feel like there might need to be some stronger charges than just giving him cocaine. I just have a very, very hard time believing that the events actually happened the way they have been portrayed.
Yeah, and I will say some of the charges that are being held against specifically the friend / person who worked for him are related to negligence, not just giving someone drugs. It sounds like Liam was clearly under the influence in a way that was a danger to him, and people either saw this, didn't do anything, potentially saw him fall and left the hotel room. But I think that more will come out once the judge interrogates the people charged, and hopefully we get more information about what actually happened that night.
Absolutely, because his child deserves to know what happened to his father, what really happened, and he deserves justice for, at minimum, neglect.
So for our next case, we are going to be all the way in the messed up territory of our cases. And that is because I will be talking about the Fall City murders. Trigger warning before I proceed, I will be discussing the murder of children. The Fall City murders took place on October 21st, 2024 in Fall City, Washington, when 5 members of the Humiston family were murdered in their home by one of the sons, a 15-year-old boy who has not been named. The victims were 7-year-old Catherine Humiston, 9-year-old Joshua, 13-year-old Benjamin, 42-year-old Sarah, and 43-year-old Mark. One of the children, an 11-year-old girl, survived the shooting and ran to the neighbor's house after being shot. At around 5 a.m., she called the police and named her brother as the shooter. The 15-year-old suspect has been charged with 5 counts of aggravated murder in the first degree and 1 count of attempted murder in the first degree. According to the 11-year-old girl, she woke up that morning to the sound of gunshots and saw her father and 9-year-old brother on the ground with blood. Her 7-year-old sister was shot after walking out of the bedroom, and then she saw her 15-year-old brother come into the room and shoot her in the hand and neck with the gun that she recognized as her father's. She saw her brother walk around to the bodies to check if they were dead, and she even played dead when he came to her. She escaped through a window in her room after she heard her brother talking on the phone and ran to the neighbor's house. However, the girl's call to police wasn't the first call that they'd gotten. The 15-year-old himself had called police and claimed that he was hiding from his 13-year-old brother, Benjamin, and that his brother was the one who had shot his entire family. He claimed that his brother had been caught looking at porn the night before and had gotten in trouble. Investigators claimed that on top of the call, The 15-year-old staged the scene to make it look like Benjamin had killed his family and committed suicide. In terms of additional evidence against him, the 11-year-old girl said that he'd been in trouble for failing some tests at school, and he was also the only one who knew the combination to the lockbox where Mark Humiston kept his gun. The 11-year-old girl is being cared for by a family member who lives in the area. And in terms of the trial for the 15-year-old, under Washington state law, there needs to be a hearing and judge approval before a case can be moved from juvenile to adult court, and all of this can take months. So we won't be learning the name of the suspect in this case anytime soon. Judge Kristen Richardson, who is presiding over the case, has ordered that the suspect not be named and has placed a ban on any photographs or video that shows him above the shoulders. We also know that the children were homeschooled and that Mark and Sarah were very active members of the community. And even though this just happened, there's already been drama in the trial. The suspect's previous defense team has been accused of moving and removing items in the crime scene. This happened when the defense team was permitted to access the scene, but were specifically prohibited from moving and opening things, and prohibited from touching things in specific areas of the house, especially the bedroom of the 11-year-old girl who survived the shooting. The members of the defense team who are accused may face sanctions and other consequences. And I just want to take the opportunity to remind our listeners and viewers that the leading cause of death for children in the US is not cancer, it's not car accidents, it's not any other illness. It is gun violence, something that is so controllable and something that should not be the case.
You're absolutely right. And not to be morbid about it, but I lost all faith in our country taking gun violence seriously after Sandy Hook. I lost all faith because if elementary school children weren't enough for you, then nothing will be. And this case is so devastating because it not only continues to show why there needs to be regulation and why gun safety is so important, but also why we need to protect children.
And I think this case is especially difficult because on its face, the father, Mark Humiston, did the right thing. The gun was locked in a lockbox, and he probably told the combination to the 15-year-old because he thought he was at the right age where he should have access to it in emergencies. And I'm not sure about how much training the 15-year-old had around guns, but we are increasingly seeing family annihilators being younger and younger. And that is so scary to me because that's what he is. He's a family annihilator. And it used to be the fact that family annihilators were usually middle-aged men. But now you have these teenagers who are taking out their entire family, children. I'm getting emotional because I just can't imagine what it was like for not only the 11-year-old girl, but the other siblings to see their own brother, who they probably love so much, doing this to them. And being so confused. And I also read and saw that in this case, the mother was fighting and tried to barricade herself. And like we said in our last episode, I can't imagine what it's like to be in fear of your own child like that. And clearly, this 15-year-old is going through something mentally. And I am just speechless at this case. This is one of those cases where I cannot read about the details without shedding a tear, because when you think about what the sole survivor of this had to go through, to have the wherewithal to think, oh, I need to play dead. Now I have to climb out of my window and run to safety. And though I do have sympathy for mental illness, I have no sympathy for trying to pin this on your brother who you killed.
And that's actually where I don't think this is mental illness. I'm not going to lie to you, Cam. It is the maliciousness to frame that pushes me over the edge to make it feel like it's not mental illness. This is an intentional act. You checked their bodies to see if they were dead. You systematically took out every member of your family. This isn't mental illness. That was a choice. And then to call the police and try to make yourself a victim, that's not mental illness. That is a conscious choice. This kid is evil. I'm going to just say it. The kid is fucking evil. Because again, it's not only that he framed his little brother. It's not only that he checked all the bodies. He went through to try to make it look like it was a murder-suicide, which in that case, why are you so special to survive? Why doesn't your brother kill you as well? What makes you different? And that's what pushes me into, no, this kid is evil. This kid made a choice. And there could very much be things wrong with him. There could very much be things that he might need some long and intense help with in the future. And I hope he gets it as he spends the rest of his life in prison.
And when I say mental illness, I count sociopathy as a mental illness. I will agree that this was not a mental break. This was calculated.
Yes.
But I think that he is not right in his head in a way that is dangerous to others.
That I completely agree with you on. Before we move on to the next case, we need to take a moment and talk about these defense attorneys, because if I don't see charges of tampering with evidence, I am going to be enraged. And the level of anger I feel right now at these defense attorneys is the same anger I felt with that school shooter who was down here in Florida, and his attorneys were keying with him and trying to act like they were the victims during sentencing. It's that same anger I feel. I can't remember these people's names. I don't give a damn to. I'll put pictures of them in the YouTube video. You tampered with evidence. So bump sanctions. I want all of you to lose your job, actually, because you tampered with evidence in a family annihilation. This is well beyond your ethical obligations to your client. Long beyond that.
And again, I understand as defense attorneys, you have to come up with the defense. But these attorneys are trying to validate his story.
Right.
And the evidence directly contradicts 13-year-old Benjamin being responsible for any of this. And I'm not going to go into detail as to why it contradicts. I will just say there is no way that he killed his family and committed suicide.
Right.
So we are going to close October out with something a little lighter. And that is on October 31st, 2024 in Fulton County, Georgia, when rapper Young Thug, whose government name is Jeffrey Lamar Williams, pleaded guilty to 1 gang charge, 3 drug charges, and 2 gun charges, and was released from custody. So this plea is all following his indictment back in May of 2022. Yes, it has been that long, on racketeering and gun charges. Prosecutors allege that he led a quote-unquote violent street gang named YSL, Young Slime Life, that committed crimes like murder, carjackings, and shootings. Young Thug and 26 others, including Gunna, aka Sergio Kitchens, were charged in this indictment. This trial, if you've been following it even a little bit, you will know that this trial has been a mess and a half. Jury selection alone, which began in January of 2023, lasted almost 10 months. Now, we would need a whole nother 2 hours to cover the messiness of the trial, so we're not going to do that today. I will say, though, that when it comes to this plea, the really interesting point about this is that Young Thug entered what's known as a blind plea, where a defendant enters a guilty plea without having an agreement with the prosecution. This was done because his lawyers and the prosecution could not agree on the conditions of his release. So let's break down the sentence and the conditions. Young Thug was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but this was changed to time served. He was also sentenced to 15 years probation. There are another 20 years in prison that will be changed to time served as long as he complies with his probation conditions, which include staying away from the metro Atlanta area for the next 10 years, except in cases of weddings, funerals, graduations, or family members with serious illnesses, and except for the 4 times a year where he is required to make an anti-gang and anti-drug presentation at a school or organization in the Atlanta area. He must also complete 100 hours of community service each year. He cannot knowingly be in contact with any member of a gang, excluding his brother and Gunna due to contractual obligations. He can't participate in gang activities, which include throwing up hand signs. He can't contact victims or their families, own a gun, or use any drugs not prescribed to him by a doctor. And finally, he can be drug tested and have his property searched at random. During the sentencing, Young Thug apologized to the court for the time and resources that the trial took and said that he'd learned from his mistakes and was committed to being better. Now, he also entered a no contest plea on a gang charge and racketeering charge, which basically says he's not pleading guilty, but he accepts the sentence. Now, after 3 other co-defendants pleaded guilty after agreeing to conditions with the prosecution, there only remains 2 other co-defendants on trial. Where did those other 26-something people go? Well, 9 people, including Gunna, accepted plea deals before the trial began, and 12 other people are being tried separately, and charges against another person were dropped after he was convicted of an unrelated murder.
Well, just to close this loop for you, friend, those last 2 men who were on trial, one just got found not guilty of all charges against him, and the other was only found guilty of one charge, which was being a felon in possession of a firearm, as he was a felon who was in possession of a firearm at the time of his arrest. He was awarded time served, and both men walked free out of that courtroom.
I know Fannie Willis is mad.
I know Fannie Willis is mad, but I also know that Young Thug's lawyer is pissed off because Young Thug's lawyer actually didn't want him to plea. He was like, no, the jury is on our side. The jury thinks this is all bull. Just hold out. Just hold out a little bit longer. And Thug just couldn't do it anymore. And I get it. This man is in jail. A bunch of his friends have been stabbed in jail. It's just a lot is going on. And personally, if I had been locked up for all these years over some nonsense, I too would just be like, I just want to go home. I'm over this. I just want to go home. Personally, do I think he should have stuck it out? Yeah, because I agree that the jury was on his side, that the case was bull. Personally, I think trying to bring rap lyrics into a court of law, it sets a bad precedent. And like Cam has said, I think it's real generous that you only give us 2 hours to go over through the mess. This is a 4-part series, 4-hour episodes, Patreon exclusive deep dive for the next 6 months. It's just into the Young Thug trial. But as somebody who followed this case relatively closely, I was in and out because sometimes it just got so convoluted that I refused to put any more depth into this. But yeah, it was a mess. I appreciate Young Thug apologizing to the court for this whole ordeal, but Fannie Willis is the one who needs to apologize to the court and apologize to the taxpayers of Georgia for wasting everybody's time on this completely unnecessary trial.
And that wraps up all the mess that happened in October. Like we said before, if we missed anything and you're like, wait, y'all didn't even talk about this, let us know in the comments and maybe we'll give it its own episode. Just let us know.
So as we move over into November, a month to be very thankful for the things you have at home, let's jump into these wild cases. And our first case today takes place on November 11th, when Richard Allen was found guilty of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of felony murder for the 2011 killings of 13-year-old Abigail Abby Williams and 14-year-old Liberty Libby German in Delphi, Indiana. Abby and Libby were reported missing after a hike on February 13th, 2017, and the next day, their bodies were found near a trail and partially covered by sticks. The case gained significant attention due to a video and audio recording from Libby's phone showing a man dubbed the, quote, bridge guy, end quote, walking on the Monon High Bridge and saying, quote, guys down the hill, end quote. The investigation stalled for over 5 years until September 2022, when a clerk revisiting tips noticed Allen had placed himself at the scene shortly after the murders. Despite his confession to being on the trail that day, Allen remained unnoticed by police until they connected an unspent .40 caliber round found at the crime scene to his pistol. He was arrested on October 26, 2022, and charged with multiple counts of murder. The trial, which lasted 17 days, included testimony from numerous witnesses and experts. Carroll County prosecutor Nick McLeland argued Allen was the bridge guy and presented graphic evidence, including photos of the crime scene, the video from Libby's phone, and recordings of Allen confessing to the murders. These included a chilling phone call to his wife, Kathy, where he said, quote, I did it. I killed Abby and Libby, end quote. Allen reportedly confessed over 60 times to various individuals, including family, prison staff, and mental health professionals. The defense, led by Brad Rossi, countered that Allen's mental health deteriorated due to months in solitary confinement, leading to false confessions. They also emphasized the lack of DNA or eyewitness evidence tying him to the crime. Clinical psychologists testified that Allen exhibited severe mental health issues, including a psychotic disorder, and displayed bizarre behavior such as eating his own feces and banging his head while in prison. Judge Francis Gohl instructed the jury to carefully consider the evidence, And after 19 hours of deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict. Alan showed no emotion as the verdict was read, while Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, cried and hugged family members. Outside the courtroom, reactions were mixed, with some cheering the verdict and others showing support for Alan. Kathy Allen maintained her husband's innocence, saying, quote, "This isn't over at all," end quote. Alan faces sentencing on December 20th, 2024. And as we are currently recording this episode on December 15th, I will do my best to include the final verdict in the episode description as well as the YouTube video. But Alan faces the possibility of up to 130 years in prison. Despite the outcome, questions about the case's handling and the lack of physical evidence continue to spark debate. Prosecutors, however, are confident that Alan, as the bridge guy, was responsible for the tragic deaths of Abby and Libby.
This was one of the first cases that I remember hearing a deep dive on when I first got into true crime, specifically true crime podcast. And what stuck with me was the Snapchat video evidence and the fact that, again, I felt so similar to these girls because when I heard this, I think I was just a few years older than them. And it was so scary to think that they went through that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We were just a few years older than them. And I haven't personally taken a deep dive into this case, but the little information I do know, I understand why some people were not celebrating the conviction. I do think there were some genuine errors with how the case was handled by the prosecution, how the police collected evidence, those kind of things. Of course, I am extremely, extremely sympathetic to those girls and know exactly how it feels to have some weird guy walking behind you, but you just go on and you live your life. You don't think anything of it. And in a lot of ways, Libby's video led to her justice, led to their justice. I genuinely feel like if that video doesn't exist, you never get justice in this case. You never find the lead to go after and the person to look for. And that's terrifying that these girls went through that and that their families have to continue to grieve and continue to live on without them. Because while this case is 7 years old for us, this case is forever for them. And I wish Abby and Libby's families healing as they continue to live on without them and to continue to grow and be at peace with the justice that has been delivered in this case. Our next story is actually a continuation from a previous story that we have told on this podcast. Because on November 20th, 2024, in the case of Sheila A.G., charged as a principal to first-degree premeditated murder for encouraging her son, Keith A.G., to kill his then-girlfriend and the mother of his child, Brooklyn Sims, the trial ended in a mistrial due to jury issues. Again, we have already covered this case in great detail. Cam did an amazing job telling this story, and I will be sure to leave a link to our full episode in our description so you can quickly check out that episode if you are interested. But for a quick overview, on August 11, 2023, 18-year-old Brooklyn Sims was fatally shot at the Home Depot on Davis Highway in Pensacola, Florida, where she worked. Keith A.G., who was 20 at the time, drove from Alabama to commit the crime after receiving texts from his mother, Sheila, urging him to act. The messages showed Sheila encouraging Keith to kill Brooklyn and even giving him the store's address. Keith shot Brooklyn multiple times in the aisle before fleeing the scene. He later turned himself in, and Keith was convicted of the murder in December of 2023 and sentenced to life in prison. Sheila A.G.'s trial began on Monday, November 18th, 2024, with prosecution witnesses, including more than a dozen individuals, and evidence presented, including surveillance footage and text messages exchanged between Sheila and Keith. Sheila did not testify, and closing arguments occurred Wednesday morning before jury deliberations. Reportedly, deliberations were marred with conflict amongst the jurors, to the point where Judge Coleman Robinson questioned each juror after concerns about physical safety arose. 2 jurors reported feeling unsafe, one citing increased heart rate and pacemaker issues. Other jurors revealed a juror had done crossword puzzles during testimony and deliberations. This juror actually spoke out to the media and stated, quote, "I could hear and I was listening," end quote. This is from juror Sally Sue Smith. I'm unsure if this is a real name or if this is an alias from the article that I'm referencing, but I'm going to go with Sally for now. She continued by stating, quote, "That's just the way I do. I just do that. And I had no idea. And then when they told me I wasn't supposed to do it, I stopped. And then today, when we went in the jury room, I had another crossword puzzle. But we were in the jury room, and you're not arguing the whole time." Additionally, some jurors described heated arguments, including alleged racial tensions. One juror even suggested replacing the problematic juror with an alternate juror, which Florida law prohibits. Sheila's defense attorney, Chris Raby, motioned for a mistrial, arguing the jury dynamics and potential bias made a fair verdict impossible. Judge Robinson granted the motion, citing the lack of seriousness shown by a particular juror and the unsafe deliberation environment. Judge Robinson further criticized the jurors' actions and emphasized the importance of a fair and just process. He expressed hopes that a future jury would handle the case responsibly, with the seriousness that is required. Sheila AG's next court date is set for February 5th, 2025. And if you can't tell, I'm infuriated by this information. Because seriously, crossword puzzles? A child is dead. Are you serious?
And then you get told to stop and do it in the deliberations room?
Come on now.
Are you dumb or are you stupid?
Or do you just not give a damn? Do you have no human empathy?
Like, she's treating this case like the crime was theft or something. Not like someone is on trial for aiding in a murder.
Exactly. Actually, she's treating it more like, oh, I'm just going to turn on my true crime podcast while I sit here and do my crossword puzzles. Like, you don't actually make a difference in whether this woman goes to jail forever and whether this child gets justice for her murder. Are you serious?
Exactly. And that is why I like to emphasize that on this podcast, we are not just telling stories. We are telling you about things that have happened to real people, things that have affected and still to this day affect real people. While true crime can be entertaining, it is not something that should desensitize us to the things that are happening to people, to the things that are causing harm to people. And it is really painful when juries cannot take these things seriously.
Exactly. Because what do you mean? Because your lack of give a damn is going to stop a child from getting justice for herself, getting justice for her own baby that now has to grow up without a father, without a mother, and honestly, hopefully without a grandmother. And you're doing crossword puzzles.
And there's so much evidence against Sheila too. We go into detail about the evidence in our episode on Brooklyn Sims. We're not going to go into detail on it today, but there is so much evidence against Sheila. I will say it is smart that she did not testify in her own trial like her son did, but she definitely deserves that conviction.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right, friend. And personally, look, I just think any trial that is done in a day and a half is overwhelming evidence, personally. And our final case for November takes place on November 26th, 2024 in McCall, South Carolina, where a series of troubling events culminated in the death of the town's mayor, George Garner II. George Garner died in a head-on collision with an 18-wheeler during a police chase. The pursuit was unrelated to any legal infractions, but aimed to ensure George's well-being. Details of why George was being pursued remain unclear, though he was connected to an active investigation by the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. Just days earlier, on November 21st, McCall Police Chief Bob Hale and his entire team of 5 officers resigned, citing a, quote, hostile work environment, end quote. In a Facebook post, Bob said he faced, quote, repeated acts of harassment and personal attacks, end quote, from a town council member who had also cut police funding, severely limiting their ability to serve the town's 2,000 residents. This departure followed earlier turmoil in June when the former police chief quit, alleging a hostile work environment created by George Garner. Despite this controversy, George Garner had recently won re-election as mayor, and the investigation into his death and the broader circumstances surrounding these events continues to this day.
I saw the news article for this one, and it is a doozy. To have your entire police force, even though it was only several people, To have the entire police force quit, that's wild. And then to have the mayor die in a police chase, what's going on?
Exactly. I'm going to need some further clarification on this. This is a very, very recent case, so there's very little additional information for us to go off of. But yeah, friend, this might need to be a case that we look into further in the future, because I just have a suspicion that some more stuff is going to come out and that we might need to talk about it.
When it comes to the wild, wacky, and messed up, this one is in the wild and wacky territory.
Absolutely. And with that, we have closed out all of our November cases. Again, if there are any cases that we missed and that you would like to hear about, please be sure to leave them in the comments below.
And now we are in the final month of the year, the current month of the year, the month of giving. And in that sentiment, you all have given us a lot of crime to talk about. In the checks calendar, 15 days that have passed in this month. I don't know if it's the weather, the election, but my God, y'all have been on some wild.
You know, they always say the weather outside is frightful.
Mm-hmm. And the inside is not delightful. We are going to kick this month off with a case that has been all over the news. If you haven't heard of it, I really don't have anything to say for you. Maybe you just don't look at the news, and I guess that's understandable. But I am talking about the case of the United Health CEO, Brian Thompson, being shot in broad daylight. This took place on December 4th, 2024 in New York City, New York, when Brian Thompson, CEO of United Healthcare, was shot at around 6:45 a.m. on a sidewalk right outside of the Hilton Hotel, where an annual investors conference was being held. Now, his shooting, which again happened in broad daylight, launched a days-long manhunt that culminated in the December 9th arrest of suspect Luigi Mangione, who was arrested at a McDonald's after an employee reported someone matching the suspect's description. Now, police found a gun on 26-year-old Luigi that they believe is the same gun used to kill Brian Thompson. They also found a handwritten document that lays out his motive and includes phrases like, quote, "These parasites simply had it coming," end quote. On top of the second-degree murder charge that he's facing in New York, he's been charged in Pennsylvania with a weapons violation, forgery, and other charges. He's currently fighting an extradition back to New York. As of December 14th, he is being represented by Karen Agnafilo, a former Manhattan Chief Assistant District Attorney. A little bit about the timeline of all the things that happened. Police believe that Luigi arrived in New York City on November 24th on a Greyhound bus, but aren't sure where he got on the bus. They believe that after this, he traveled to a hostel where the now infamous smiling photo was taken when he pulled his mask down to allegedly flirt with someone working at the hostel. Investigators also found the words "delay, deny, depose" written on bullets found at the scene. And information is continuously coming out about Luigi Mangione, but things that we do know at this point are that at some point he had a serious painful injury to his back. There is no evidence that he was enrolled in United Healthcare at any point. We also know that he comes from a wealthy family in Baltimore and that he graduated valedictorian from his high school and got his bachelor's from University of Pennsylvania in 2020.
Yeah, y'all really said we're going to start December off with a bang. Excuse the pun. Because, yeah, this was utterly wild. Because not only was it wild that it was broad daylight and everything, you know, I got to be devil's advocate here. But the internet's response to this, I don't know how I feel about it. I feel a little icky. I feel a little icky because we can all agree that health insurance in America specifically is a bunch of bullshit. These companies are evil. These companies make money denying claims for life-saving measures. Absolutely. But also, Brian was a husband. Brian was a father. And let's extend some sympathy to his family that has to mourn him, even though we don't like the evil company that he works for. And yeah, I think this case is wild. This is one that I'm going to definitely follow and just kind of see how everything plays out. Because again, I think the part that's so odd for me is the lack of connection to United Healthcare. I felt like when this initially first happened, I expected this to be like some personal vendetta kind of thing. And it just doesn't seem like the evidence is panning out that way.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that is interesting about this is that he comes from a wealthy background.
Right.
While there's no direct connection to United Healthcare, I think his beef was maybe with the healthcare system in general, and United Healthcare being the largest health plan in the US was his target. I don't know if he would have continued to target other health plan executives around the country if he hadn't been found. But while I don't necessarily agree with the way that the internet responded, I do think I understand it, just because there is almost no one in this country who has not been negatively affected by healthcare. I also think that the internet's response and society's response are two different things. The internet can breed a sense of detachment from people and the things that affect them. And just because the internet is responding one way does not mean society will respond another. When it comes to his trial, I don't know if we'll have a choice not to follow it. It's going to be huge. And I think it's especially going to be really interesting to see the defense that gets levied. The internet sleuths are booked and busy. People have pulled up his Goodreads account. And one of the interesting things from his Goodreads account is that he read the Unabomber's manifesto. He read and reviewed the Unabomber's manifesto. And so you really do begin to see some of the reasoning and mindset that he was in. It's also reported that he pretty much cut off contact with family and friends in the months leading up to this shooting. So we do know that this was something that was planned. And while there is going to be a lot of evidence against him, I think that the defense is not going to be he didn't do this. It's going to be either his mental state or the justification of his motive.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point. I believe it was very well eloquently said that at the end of the day, multiple things can be true at once. Because I think we can all agree that health insurance is not great, but people deserve empathy and justice. I also 100% agree that it's sounding like the mental state wasn't great. And I would not be surprised if the defense was not some kind of insanity defense, especially kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier of how brazen and bold this was. I thought that was crazy. But also what really shocked me is when you said he was charged with second-degree murder. I feel like this is a clear-cut first-degree murder case. But maybe they're concerned about being able to prove premeditation to Brian specifically and not just premeditation in general. Maybe that's what the concern is, but that's very surprising to me.
Yeah.
But I too am very curious what his defense is going to say. If this even goes to trial, maybe he'll just plead guilty and be done with it. And more information that comes out, because sometimes I truly believe that prosecution offices need to start hitting up the internet sleuths, because the internet sleuths find everything.
Right.
Because again, if you're telling me they went and found his Goodreads account based on a name, they cycled through all possibilities to find his Goodreads account, the prosecution needs to put some of y'all on the payroll.
I will say that might be difficult given the current climate of the internet sleuths. They are more likely to be working for the defense than they are the prosecution.
You're right.
Let us know y'all's thoughts on this case in the comments. What are y'all thinking? How do you think the trial will turn out? What kind of defense do you think the defense will use? Let us know. Next, I'm going to be talking about something else really messed up that happened this month. Just checked calendar 4 days ago when wealthy real estate brothers were charged with sex trafficking. Trigger warning here for discussion of sexual assault and sex trafficking. This took place on December 11th, 2024 in New York when brothers Tal Oren and Alan Alexander, two of whom are well-known real estate brokers, were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit sex trafficking and sex trafficking, all related to their involvement in an alleged sex trafficking ring where they, quote, drugged and sexually assaulted women, end quote, in cases going back to 2010. I will say, while the charges only go back to 2010, prosecutors claim that their predatory activity goes back to their high school years in the early 2000s. Specifically, prosecutors say that they used their wealth and fame to get women to go on trips where they would then sexually assault the women and would sometimes offer the women concert tickets or other travel opportunities, potentially as a way to keep them quiet. These assaults were allegedly planned well in advance, with the brothers sharing photos with each other to choose who their next victims would be. They would then message the women through social media or dating apps. Prosecutors say that within hours of meeting up with the women, they would drug them and sexually assault them. All three brothers are facing 15 years to life in prison and are maintaining their innocence. Prosecutors have asked that they be imprisoned ahead of their trial due to there being a flight risk. Now, I said that the brothers Tal and Orrin are real estate agents. They are specifically real estate agents at a well-known company called Douglas Elliman. And one of the allegations of sexual misconduct comes from a woman who was a broker at that same company and alleged that after having a drink with the brothers at a party, she blacked out and woke up in a hospital. The CEO of Douglas Elliman, Howard Lorber, abruptly stepped down in October after there was criticism that he hadn't properly handled allegations against the brothers. Other evidence includes messages recovered from the brothers' phones showing them discussing, quote unquote, shipping women out to places like Tulum, Mexico. Y'all have really been active this month.
Outdone yourself, truly.
Yeah. What's the opposite of a gold star? That's what y'all get.
A coal star.
Yeah. In the spirit of Christmas.
Jesus Christ, man. This really just shows you that some men will just assault women for power. Because there are plenty of women who would voluntarily and consensually sleep with you. You like having power over women by assaulting them. You do that for power. That's the only reason you do that. And it's not surprising that the CEO didn't do anything when the allegations came up, because I'm sure they're one of his top earners. I can't fire my top earner. Where's all my money gonna flow if I don't condone the violence? Oh, that's crazy.
And the scary thing about this is it is eerily close to the plot of the movie Blink Twice.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I didn't even think about that.
And people were saying Blink Twice is not fiction. This kind of stuff is happening.
Absolutely.
And I can fully understand women who were fully aware of what had happened to them, but took the concert tickets, but took the travel because they knew how difficult it would be to actually get justice for what happened to them. It's hard enough when a nobody off the street commits a crime like this. When it's someone who has power and money, it is exponentially more difficult.
Exactly. And it's also more difficult when you've been drugged, so you can't even communicate what happened. This woman who worked with them said she remembered having a drink and then woke up in a hospital. That's terrifying. So though you know something happened, you can't even articulate what because you were drugged, because a crime was initiated against you to begin with.
Right. And prosecutors say that they believe this goes back to their high school years. This is a sickness.
It absolutely is a sickness. It's also a sickness that has been condoned by everybody in their lives. If it goes all the way back to high school, there's no way that we're just now finding out this information. People absolutely in the past have said things about them and they either weren't believed or it was swept under the rug, or again, they didn't have evidence, so they weren't taken seriously. That's infuriating.
So to close out December, we are going to end on a bit of a lighter note, a story that falls into the wacky category of our cases. And that is the story of the father who faked his death to be with his lover being charged. This also took place on December 11th, 2024 in Green Lake County, Wisconsin, and relates to 45-year-old Ryan Borgwert being charged with obstructing the search of his body, a charge which came after he turned himself in on December 10th. All of this came after he faked his death back in August. He told investigators that he purposefully overturned his kayak in a lake, dropped his phone, and then used an inflatable boat to get back to shore. He then used an electric bike to ride 70 miles to Madison, Wisconsin, where he took a bus to Detroit, then Canada, and got on a plane to Paris, where he then traveled to a country in Eastern Europe. Investigators uncovered evidence from a laptop that showed he'd been in contact with a woman from Uzbekistan and had been planning a move to Europe. He'd also taken out a $375,000 life insurance policy on himself back in January. Law enforcement apparently first made contact with Ryan Borgwert back in mid-November when he sent them a video showing that he was safe in an apartment in an unspecified location. Now, why is he being charged with obstructing the search of his body? That's because this search took more than a month and cost almost $35,000. He, however, has pleaded not guilty to the charges and was released on a $500 bail, which he'll only have to pay if he misses a court appearance. He claimed to investigators that he faked his own death and left behind his wife and 3 children due to quote-unquote personal issues. Now, a little bit more about this. He picked the lake where he drowned because it was the deepest lake in Wisconsin. He told this to investigators himself. He said he didn't expect the search to take more than a couple of weeks. He didn't know it would take more than a month. How could he have known that? Even though he picked the deepest lake in Wisconsin. Now, he plans to represent himself since he, quote, only has $20 in his wallet, end quote. The judge did let him know that he can be appointed a public attorney, but I don't think his brain is connecting those dots. I don't think his brain is connecting anything. His wife of 22 years has filed for divorce and said in the filing that their marriage has been, quote unquote, irretrievably broken. She is also filing for sole custody of their children. Now, apparently when he got to Paris, a woman picked him up. They spent some time together in a hotel before he began living somewhere in the country of Georgia. And that is what we know about this wild case.
Yeah, girly, I've been hearing about this one float around on the internet. And just get a divorce. If you're so in love with this girl from Uzbekistan, just get a divorce. Don't fake your death.
Get a divorce and go on 90 Day Fiancé.
Come on now. And then you'll at least get some money out of it because apparently you're broke. Because also, okay, now I'm trying to let me be a little more serious. Because also, you faking your death, your wife and 3 children had to think you were dead for the last 3 months.
And then to find out, I cannot imagine what that family is going through. To go through the grief of thinking your husband and father are dead, all to find out that he faked it all to be with some woman across the world. And the thing is, I don't think he knew it was internet love.
But even if it was internet love, I'm sorry. No, it's actually giving you are a sugar daddy. It's not giving that anybody loved anybody. It's giving that you were funding her life. And then you showed up. So she did her part. She came in, she did her part to like, yeah, I'm real. I'm here. Thank you for throwing your entire life away from me. And just get a divorce. I agree. Just get a divorce and go on 90 Day Fiancé. I don't understand.
Exactly. Because now you're broke and you're facing charges.
And you choosing to defend yourself.
Right. I don't know what an obstruction charge carries, but a divorce would have been cheaper, I feel like.
Yeah, you might have actually got something out of it. Like, honestly, you might have gotten something out of it, especially if you're as broke as you say you are. You'd be entitled to some of it, right? Here's the real tea, though. Did the wife get the $375,000 on life insurance? Did she get that? That's what I want to know.
That's a great question. I feel like it was probably difficult. 1, because they didn't have the body. And 2, I think after the search ended, that's around the same time when they started figuring out that he planned this.
Yeah, he's not dead. Fair.
She needs something, though.
She needs something for sure. I will say, in his defense, though he was abandoning his family and leaving his wife for this imaginary relationship he had built with this woman in Uzbekistan, at least he was going to make sure they weren't broke. You know, he got them a nice little life insurance policy. He was going to at least make sure your bills were paid, you know, which points. He gets points for that.
But if you're going to do that, do it smarter.
True.
Impact over intent here. Okay.
True. Ooh, Lordy. Yeah, friend. I needed that. I needed to end this episode off with a laugh. I needed to end this season off with a laugh because we've covered so many cases that have brought me to tears, that have emotionally wrecked me for days. And I needed that. So thank you, friend.
You're welcome. I do my best. And like we said, if there's other stuff that happened on or before December 15th, or there is stuff that has happened between now and December 27th when we will be releasing this episode, drop it in the comments. And if it is some especially heinous stuff, trust, we will be aware.
We do indeed listen to y'all in your comments. We read every comment.
We really do. And also know we do read the comments where y'all be weird. Like some of y'all comments are just weird and creepy.
Facts.
Not going to say anything further.
But we do take all of your comments under advisement. We do listen to you guys because at the end of the day, we are a podcast of the people. And Cam and I are so lucky to have fostered the community that we have fostered with our podcast and taken our love of just talking for hours and bringing it to you guys who just want to talk to us. So it has been an amazing second season of Criminalish. I have loved every second of it. And we look forward to more stories to come and the growth of our community as we embark on better storytelling, on more sympathetic storytelling and ethical telling of these stories.
Well said. So, as we wrap up today's discussion, for the final time in 2024, we are going to move into our segment called Today in Crime, where we'll describe a crime or crime-related event that took place on this day. So, on December 27th, 1985, world-renowned primatologist and conservationist Dr. Dian Fossey is found murdered in her cabin at Karasoke, a research site in the mountains of Rwanda. It is widely believed that she was killed in connection in her lifelong crusade against poaching. An animal lover from a young age, Diane began her career as an occupational therapist. She would later credit her work with children for helping her earn the trust of the mountain gorillas that she studied. In 1963, she borrowed money in order to finance an extended trip to Africa. Her travels brought her into contact with the archaeologists Louis and Mary Leakey and wildlife photographers Alan and Joan Root, and introduced her to the work of primatologist Jane Goodall. She published several articles about her travels and returned to the United States, but in 1966, the Leakeys helped her secure funding to study gorillas in the Congo. Political unrest in the Congo led Diane to flee the country and set up her camp, Karasoke, in the Rwandan foothills of the Virunga Mountains. There, she studied and interacted extensively with the native gorillas. She eventually received a PhD in zoology from Cambridge University and lectured for several years at Cornell. Her research on gorilla societies greatly enhanced mankind's understanding of one of its closest evolutionary relatives. She's best known, however, as a fierce opponent of poaching. Park rangers were known to accept bribes, allowing poachers to set up traps and routinely kill gorillas in the national park where Diane worked. After poachers brutally killed her favorite gorilla, Digit, in 1977, Diane launched a public and somewhat obsessive crusade to protect gorillas and punish poachers. She destroyed traps and was even known to detain poachers, sometimes physically beating them. She cultivated a reputation among the locals as a practitioner of dark magic in an effort to keep people from harming her gorilla friends. Her efforts garnered worldwide attention to the anti-poaching cause, but may have led to her death. Though an allegedly jealous fellow researcher was convicted in absentia for her murder in Rwanda, many believe that her killing was revenge for her treatment of poachers. She was buried in a cemetery at Karasoke alongside Digit and other gorillas killed by poachers. Though she had become reclusive and bitter toward the end of her life, the final entry in her journal was a hopeful one. Quote, "When you realize the value of all life, you learn to dwell less on what is past and concentrate more on the preservation of the future." End quote. The fund she founded, the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund International, carries on her efforts to protect gorillas to this day. And that is what happened on this day in crime. If you found the story interesting, leave a gorilla emoji in the comments. Poaching is seriously crazy. Like, the people who do that really are evil, because you were going out of your way to harm animals and take things from their body and sell it, be it the meat, be it the ivory tusks from elephants. You're evil.
Yeah, it's a disgusting practice. It absolutely is a disgusting practice, especially because poaching specifically isn't ingrained like for self-benefit, you know?
Yeah.
It's not hunting. There is a complete difference between hunting and poaching. Those are completely different things.
And what gets me about poachers is there's no preservation in mind. Like, with hunting, you're not killing off an entire species. With poaching, you very well may be, but you don't care.
Exactly. Which is why I feel like most hunters that I know who are avid hunters specifically target animals that, one, repopulate, like rabbits, for lack of a better phrase, but animals that will literally become an infestation if they have no natural predators in the area. That's hunting.
Right.
You're just trying to use another life to make money for yourself. And that's very icky to me. It's very gross.
And also, to brutally kill a gorilla to get back at a person, that's also weird and evil. And when we think about serial killers, one of the calling cards is harm to animals.
Exactly. It's really step one.
Yeah. And it's not to say that you have to be the biggest animal lover, but I think most people, at the very least, extend sympathy to animals and would not harm them unless they were defending themselves. or unless it's a case of hunting.
Exactly. But even then, you could actually despise animals. You could despise animals. You could hate animals. As long as you are not willing to torture them in death, that's really what it is for me. Like, the torturing in death is the problem. To go out of your way to make another living thing's death as painful as possible is crazy. You are crazy. You don't have to like animals to not be willing to do that.
Right.
Any other thoughts, friend?
Nope. That's all I got.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us on today's episode. And there are way too many sources to name and thank, but we would like to give a special thank you to our listeners who've supported and listened to us all throughout this year and last. If you'd like to check out photos related to this case, be sure to follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. We cannot wait to see y'all again in April 2025 when we kick off season 3 of the Criminalish Podcast.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, be sure to tell a friend and leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish Podcast. And if you are listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel and feel free to leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends, and Happy New Year. Bye.
Bye.